The case of Jodi Jones in 2003 has been one of Scotland's most controversial due to the conviction of her teenage boyfriend at the time, Luke Mitchell. However, after having the opportunity to interview Dr. Sandra Lean, the leading criminologist on this case for the last 21 years, I was able to learn new insights into not only how this could have happened, but why. So sit down, grab yourself a mocha as we return to the case of Jodi Jones. After my last video on this case, there were a few details that Dr. Lean wanted to clarify, which I welcomed her to, as on my channel I try my best to be as factually accurate as possible. Witnesses reported seeing two boys riding a homemade moped around the area where Jodi Jones was found, raising concerns about their possible involvement in her murder. The moped was observed leaning against the V in the wall near the crime scene around the time of Jodi's death, but the boys were nowhere to be seen. It took 5 days after Jodi's murder for the boys to come forward to the police, and it was later revealed that one of them was Jodi's cousin. Alarmingly, the day after Jodi's death, the other boy, who was not related to her, cut his hair with scissors in what appeared to be an attempt to change his appearance. After my video on the case, is there any details that you'd like to correct or add for context, seeing as I know that you said in our email that there were a few details that I might have gotten slightly wrong.
They're quite common errors. The two boys on the moped, the one who cut his hair,
yes,
before coming forward for fear of potentially being identified as Stocky Man, was actually the one who was Jodi's cousin.
Oh, okay.
You said in the video that there was Jodi's cousin and the other one cut his hair. No, it's actually the one who was Jodi's cousin.
Oh, interesting.
He also told police that his gran, who is Jodi's gran, Alice Walker, told them not to go forward to the police.
Oh.
Yeah. And it would appear the police never followed that up. It's there in his statement, my gran told us not to come forward. And then there's nothing to say that they went back and asked the gran, did you? And if so, why?
Yeah.
This is in the first few days. It's bizarre.
Yeah, it's really bizarre. I think quite a lot of things about this case, even just watching the documentary, I think it was Murder in a Small Town that you were in. I got quite a lot of my information from that because I knew quite a lot of it would be accurate. I noticed whilst watching that documentary that quite a lot of things that the police should have done, they decided not to do and just kind of focus their investigation solely on Luke, which
I think there's a belief in the general public that the police will do these things automatically. And having worked in this field now for 21 years, it's astounding how many investigations just don't do what we, the ordinary public, think they will do. They just don't do it.
No, I, as a true crime channel, I've seen quite a lot of, I don't want to say corrupt because people like to use that word a lot, but I've seen quite a lot of officers and police forces all around the world do things that they probably shouldn't be doing in investigations. They seem to have a bias when they do investigations that they have a suspect in mind and they do what they can to prove it was that suspect rather than look at the broader picture.
I think it's important for people to understand there as well that police investigations, like any other organisation, have a budget.
Yes.
And if you think about the logistics of going into a crime scene and saying anything could have happened here and anybody could be responsible, so we will go down each rabbit hole until we find the most likely. The cost of doing that would be prohibitive. So they go in, they get themselves an idea of what they think is likely to have happened, and then they build an investigation backwards from there. So in part, it's because of money. In part, especially in the UK, it's because of league tables and efficiency.
Yeah.
You can't spend thousands and thousands of pounds going down a route of investigation, get to the end and go, actually, no. Let's start again. That's not going to happen. So it doesn't necessarily have to be corruption.
No.
It can be very practical as well.
There are a few things that I found in news stories and articles which describe the evidence that was used against Luke which led to his conviction. His alibi was one of the main things that came under scrutiny, with his mother even being arrested for providing a false alibi, with the charges eventually dropped. Many articles state that Luke's brother changed his statement and provided an alternative story that he was actually in his room watching porn, which he wouldn't have done if anyone else was in the house, meaning that Luke was not in the kitchen cooking dinner like his mother, his brother, and Luke had originally stated. Luke Mitchell's mother faced intense scrutiny during the investigation, as she was his primary alibi. She claimed that on the night of Jodi's murder, Luke was at home with his older brother and her cooking dinner, a responsibility that Luke had taken on due to his mother being a single parent with a full-time job. Despite her unwavering insistence on his innocence, the police viewed her as a potential accomplice, which led to her being arrested and charged with providing a false alibi and perversion of justice. During the investigation, everyone who was a part of the initial search party with Luke had similar statements about how Luke had come across the body. They all detailed how Luke's dog, an Alsatian, started sniffing the air and her ears perked up, which is how Luke knew to go over the wall, as that is where the dog had indicated something was wrong. However, by the time it came to trial, the story had changed, not just by one witness, but by every person that was included in the search party. The details had changed in the exact same way too. Instead of Luke's dog indicating where to go, the narrative changed to Luke knowing where Jodi was and leading the group to her body, as if he knew where he left it earlier in the evening. Luke's defense highlighted this in court to the jury. After Kareen, Luke's mother, had the charges dropped against her along with his brother, do you think they might have convinced his brother to change his statement in some sort of way through fear of reprisal, seeing as I know that he said that he was at home and Luke was at home with him, and that was part of his alibi. But then I read in quite a few news stories and articles from around that time that he changed his statement, saying that he was actually in his bedroom watching things. And he wouldn't have done that if anyone was in the house with him. Do you think that was like maybe he changed it because of the police?
No, I've explained this on a number of occasions, and it is quite subtle. And unless you understand the way these things work in court, it's really difficult to grasp. But Luke's brother's early statements were taken in the house, no big deal. And then nothing happened, as far as his brother was concerned, for 9.5 months. And then he's going to work one morning, and he comes across a police roadblock, which he thinks is for people that don't have road tax or whatever. The next thing, he's descended on by half a dozen police officers. He's dragged out the car. He's thrown face down on the road. All these officers screaming at him. He's bundled into a police car. He's taken off, and he's held for 6 hours for interrogation under the same rules that allowed them to do this to Luke. So interrogated for 6 hours, no legal representation, police officers screaming at him. And in this interrogation, they started saying to him, "We don't believe your story. We think you and your mum are covering up for your brother. We don't think he was home." And they just blew his mind. Yeah. There is a question about him being on his computer and things being on his computer. And he's like, "I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what you're talking about." And then nothing again for another year until it comes to court. And then it's put to him on the stand. You were watching, I don't know if I can say this, we might have to bleep it out. You were watching pornography. Yeah. And you were doing things while you were watching pornography, weren't you? And there's this, it's all put to him, and he's agreeing that these suggestions could have happened. He's not saying they did. He's not offering this information. This is being put to him on the stand. Just out of the blue.
Out of the blue, yeah.
So when we looked at he did admit there were a couple of sites that he occasionally
visited.
was on for
Yeah.
And this particular day, the computer records show that he'd actually gone onto a car site. He was mad for cars and
Yeah.
mechanics and all that sort of thing. And the so-called porn sites were a few seconds. And back in the day, you used to get what were called pop-ups.
Pop-up ads, yeah.
Yeah. So the explanation, the expert explanation was that these were pop-ups, but that didn't come out in court. It was all about he was looking at porn, and because he'd admitted that he'd sometimes visited these sites, they tied the two together. So he didn't change his story. These were put to him as suggestions, and he agreed that they could have been true, but he didn't say they were.
No.
So you see the slight difference there.
Yeah, see, when I read the news stories and articles, every single one was like, he changed his statement to this rather than the way that you explained it, which I think, again, is, I want to say it helps the press to kind of pile on all this kind of evidence that was against Luke, to kind of be like, oh, we got the right guy, when they don't want to look at the possibility that there might have been something that went wrong there.
It's interesting as well, I think, that they were so super keen to emphasise that his brother changed his story.
Yeah.
They barely touched the fact that the search trio, so the three members of Jodi's family who were out supposedly looking for Jodi that night, all changed the stories, all in the same way, to end up with all the same completely different story. That is documented. We have that. There's a lot of stuff online at the minute about, the transcripts don't show that. Well, of course they don't, because these changes were in statements that never really made it into court. The defence did try to, bring them in, but at the end of the day, if the search trio say, no, we didn't say that, there's nothing that the defence can do.
Proof otherwise, yeah. Another piece of evidence that didn't add up to me was the statements of the witness, Andrina Brighton, that the prosecution relied on during trial. Even though she couldn't identify Luke Mitchell in court, she originally stated that she saw a young male with a young female that she also couldn't identify as Jodi on the path that led down to the crime scene around the time that Luke was supposed to meet Jodi. They looked like they were having an argument. Articles claimed that she stated the male was in a fishing-style khaki green jacket. However, there has also been many claims that Luke Mitchell's mother earned a parka jacket either the night of or the following day to Jodi's murder. This does not make sense due to the jackets being different. Why would Corrine, Luke's mother, earn a parka jacket when he was supposedly wearing something different according to the star witness for the prosecution? On top of this, another piece of evidence that was highlighted was that Luke had used the speaking clock. This is something you can phone that would then tell you the time. Prosecution made it a point to show that Luke used the speaking clock at 4:54 p.m, which they then used to prove that this must have been when Luke was on his way to meet Jodi, as they had been texting very soon before this, arranging to meet. When asked why he had used the speaking clock at this time, he had no explanation for it. Something else that I found interesting was the witness that the prosecution tried to rely on, but then she couldn't identify Luke in court. I noticed that she said that she saw a male and someone that she couldn't identify as Jodi, but a young female, walking down that path looking like they were having an argument, and that he was in from what I've seen, many of them report that she said that he was in a army kind of style jacket, like army camo jacket. But then there's this whole thing where apparently Luke was known to wear like this pink Parker style jacket, and then Corrine had supposedly burnt that. But I don't understand how the prosecution have decided to rely that was Luke wearing an army style jacket, but then this pink Parker jacket comes into play as well. Like, how change clothes?
A couple of things that we'll have to clarify there.
Okay.
The witness did not say army style.
Okay.
She said fishing style.
Okay.
Fishing style jacket and matching trousers. And this youth was late teens, early 20s, with very thick hair, standing up in a clump at the back. Very thick. I can't remember what colour she said. Standing up in a clump at the back. Now, Luke, as you've seen from photos of it, poker straight, blonde hair.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. I don't know where the pink parka is coming from. There was no pink. It's just a parka jacket.
Yeah.
But the whole parka jacket, I have lost months of sleep over the parka jacket because he didn't, according to Luke's family and his closest friends, he did not have a parka jacket prior to the murder.
Okay.
But the police came and took all his clothes on the 4th of July, left him with only the clothes he was standing in. So his mum took him shopping the following week, and one of the things they bought him was a parka jacket.
Yeah.
And then the media photographed him repeatedly in said parka jacket. So when they were saying to people, have you ever seen Luke Mitchell in a parka jacket? The whole of Scotland had.
Yeah.
The question is, did you see him in a parka jacket prior to June 30th? There are no photographs of him in a parka jacket prior to then. There are a couple of witnesses who said they'd seen him in a parka jacket. One of them was asked on the stand, what made you note that he was wearing a parka jacket? And this lad said, oh, it was the murder and everything. Well, it clearly had to be after the murder then.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's no reliable evidence that he had a parka jacket prior to the murder. That's the first thing. Secondly, in the interview of 14th August, which was what they call the Section 14 interview, that was the big one with the no legal representation, 3 police officers, 2 into it, all of that thing. They were insistent that he was wearing a German army shirt. And they had 50-odd witnesses to Luke wearing this German army shirt.
Yeah.
By the following April, the army shirts disappeared, along with the 50-odd witnesses, and being replaced by a parka jacket. Well, how did that happen?
Yeah,
Where did the witnesses go? Where did the army shirt go? And then they claimed that the parka had been burned in a log burner in his mum's back garden. Yes, now we're getting towards evidence, except they took the log burner, the bricks, the grate, everything, forensically tested it to within an inch of its life, and guess what?
Nothing.
No evidence of a parka jacket or any other clothing being burned there.
Yeah, because I noticed that people in this article, they were saying that neighbours stated that they smelt a funny smell the evening of Jodi or the day after, and that's that they put that to, oh, she must have been burning this parka jacket, but there would be some sort of residue or ashes or something of the sort to.
You also have the issue there of these witnesses. So 2 of them were next door, side by side.
Yeah.
So the kitchen windows are just a matter of feet apart, and this burner is between the 2 kitchen windows. These neighbours said they smelled wood smoke, and they didn't close their window because they liked the smell of wood smoke.
Yeah.
There's one other neighbour who is back to back. The gardens are back to back. He's the one that said he smelled funny smell and smoke, the only one. They went round all the neighbours. They took something like 37 statements from the neighbours whose houses all back on to each other. And these are the only 2 statements they've got. One saying it's wood smoke right next door, and the one across the fence saying it's funny smell and smoke. Guess whose evidence they relied on to back up? Yeah, it's insane.
Yeah, it seems that they kind of pick and choose who they want to believe and listen to, especially in this case. It's mind-boggling to me, honestly. The other thing that I found interesting is that they decided to put into some sort of evidence that Luke had used the speaking clock on his phone to know what time it was. He was like, why would you need to know that if you're at home and there's a clock? I'm just going to say now, I don't do the cooking in this house. My boyfriend does. Every time, we don't have a clock in this house, but every time he wants to know the timings of stuff, he says to his phone, what's the time, and he uses the same similar thing. So it's not beyond the realm of possibility that Luke did that on that day and just didn't have an explanation for it, because it's like something that you just do rather than.
Well, the phone records show that he had a habit of calling the speaking clock.
Oh, okay.
In the morning, sort of round about between 8:15 and 9:15. So time to get ready to leave for school.
Yes.
And in the afternoons between sort of 4:30 and 5. So he's getting home from school and looking at starting dinner, because he cooked dinner for the family.
Yeah.
So there is evidence there that this is something he did on a regular basis. But because this one night they need it to mean something, they make a thing of it. But the other thing about this is the witness that we talked about that couldn't identify him in court. She describes a guy standing at the entrance to the path, and he's got his hands out and come a bit so that you can see. He's got his hands out like this in front of him.
Yeah.
At his sides.
Yeah.
Okay. This is at exactly the time that Luke's calling the speaking clock. So either he glued his phone to his ear in order to have both hands out in front of him.
Yeah.
Or the guy at the end of the path wasn't him. Because we know his phone is connected to the speaking clock at that exact time.
Yeah. That's a really good point. Because in quite a lot of the articles, there's no time for when she said that she'd gone past. It just says that she did go past at some point during the night before Jodi was killed, and she noticed that was happening.
Now that's really interesting, because they did try to claim that it was between 4:40. Now I have to get this absolutely right, or I'll get jumped on. 4:40 and 4:54, I believe.
Yes.
That was the time that she was passing the end of the entrance. And this is all manipulated to fit with Jodi leaving at 4:10, because had she left any later, the rest of the evidence means it couldn't have been Luke.
Yeah.
So they're manipulating this backwards. But this lady, when she first went to the police, gave a time much later. And the reason she gave that time is she said she'd gone shopping with her kids and she'd got home and her husband had called to say, I don't know, he was going to be late or whatever. Yeah. And she remembered the time of the call and reckoned she'd got in about half an hour before that. So that's how she knew what time it was. She then went and got her phone and found the call from her husband and took it back to the police to back up the time that she said originally.
Yeah.
And still, they worked the time backwards to fit this 10 to 5 leaving for Jodi.
The nail in the coffin piece of evidence that most news stories and articles rely on to prove Luke's involvement is a knife sheath that was found in Luke's home when searched by police many months after Jodi's death. The number 666 was scratched onto it, most commonly connected with the devil, along with Jodi's date of birth and the date of her death, with the initials JJ. The common theory, and the one that the prosecution relied on, was that this housed the murder weapon, which according to media and prosecution, was never found. The big piece of evidence that they all like to jump on is that Luke had a knife sheath with Jodi's date and death date on it. But there's no, and they all say that, oh, this must have housed the knife that he used to kill her, but there's no evidence of when he would have scratched that onto the sheath. I don't understand how you could jump on something like that and be like, he did this and planned it, so he wrote the dates on there before or at the time, or it's that seems to be the biggest piece of evidence that they all like to rely on. And
again, the whole story of that is they claimed at trial there was a missing knife. Yeah. And this empty pouch, this empty sheath, was evidence that a knife was missing. The knife wasn't actually missing. His mum handed it to his lawyer and his lawyer took it to the police. We have the statement from his lawyer that says so. But they have this empty pouch and they go, this must be the knife that you used and it's missing, so that must have been the murder weapon. There are a couple of difficulties with that. The first is the type of knife that it housed. And I actually, oh no, I don't. It's the wrong one. I was going to say by pure chance, I have one that I found in the garden. It's nothing to do with the murder. No, I've moved it. But this knife that fitted in that pouch was too small to have inflicted the injuries on Jodi. It was just a tiny, a 2-inch blade or something like that. So I think my camera's just gone doolally. It was far too small. And the pathologist himself, when they showed a similar knife in court, the pathologist said, in order for that to be the knife that inflicted the injuries to the back of Jodi's throat, it would have to be held like that.
Oh God.
To avoid her teeth injuring the hand.
Yeah.
It would have to be. Now, I'm not sure how much damage anybody could do holding a knife like this. And the idea that a knife that size simply could not have inflicted the injuries that were inflicted on
you. Yeah, it's because I think quite a lot of them described it as a scunting knife.
Scunting knife.
Yeah. Which I'm not too familiar with because I don't really know like the different type of knives and stuff. But they also quite a lot of them said that it's used for fishing. I think I'm not too sure.
Scunting, skinning, and hunting.
Oh, okay.
So
yeah. I was curious if there was any weight to the theory that the Black Dahlia and the Marilyn Manson painting was actually connected to this case, considering a lot of news stories and articles like to mention that this was supposedly Luke's inspiration for the murder. Is this another way to demonize Luke, or was there actually something to suggest this? Is there actually any connection to the Black Dahlia case in this circumstance, or do you think this was another way of trying to demonize Luke in the media? Because I know that he didn't have anything to say that he was like he'd seen this Black Dahlia painting beforehand.
No, so it was a complete red herring, and even the pathologist himself said that any similarities between the two murders were superficial. Yeah, because even just seeing, because I know about the Black Dahlia case as someone who's looked into true crime and cases quite a lot. It's one that gets mentioned a lot. I couldn't, even just looking at it like as a whole, I couldn't see any like sort of connection with Marilyn Manson or the Black Dahlia or anything like that with Jodi's case. I think it was just something thrown out there to be like, this guy he loves the Black Dahlia and he tried to recreate it. And well, the police officer who found the Manson paintings said in his evidence, at the time, these images were really, really difficult to find. You had to know what you were looking for. Yeah. Well, that suggests that the police officer knew what he was looking for. And the question is why, when there was no other evidence to suggest Luke had ever seen it? Yeah. How did the police officer know what he was looking for? That's a very good question indeed. The last piece of evidence I wanted to ask about was the description of Jodi that Luke had apparently given to the police. Many articles state that he described a distinctive hair clasp that she was wearing that was not visible when her body was found. They also claim that he described what clothes she was wearing that day, which has been theorized he wouldn't have known unless he saw her before she died. Apparently Luke mentioned Jodi's hair clasp that he wouldn't have known that she was wearing. I literally have like the thing that it says in the article. It says, Mitchell discovered Jodi's body, which was hidden behind a wall on the path after claiming his dog led him to the scent. Family members with him said he appeared to know where the body was. When he was later questioned, he mentioned a distinctive hair clasp which was not readily visible on Jodi's body, and his description of her clothing implied he had seen her much later than just at school as he had claimed. So, in my opinion, as someone who read that, I'm like, if he found the body, he would know the clothes that she would have had on her because he's the one that came across the horrific scene. So obviously he would have seen the clothes. But is there any explanation for how he
noticed this distinctive hair clasp, which was not readily visible on her body.
Yeah, because this is actually a combination of a number of stories.
Okay.
So the mention of the hair tie was actually in an interview with a reporter.
Okay.
Who had jotted down in his notepad, scrunchy ? Okay. And when he was questioned about what that meant, he couldn't remember. He had no context, just that he was having a conversation with Luke and this word had come up, scrunchy. Yeah. So in order to get round making it Luke who'd introduced it, they suggested that this is a word that the reporter himself would not have used, so it must have been Luke that used it. So it's not part of the investigation in which Luke mentions the scrunchie. It's in this conversation with a journalist. We don't know how much the journalist knew by that stage. And we do know that a lot was leaked to the media.
Yeah.
There is no context for that, so we simply don't know. We simply don't know. As for the clothing, no, Luke probably wouldn't have known from the scene what Jodi was wearing. For a start, her hands were tied behind her back with her trousers, so they were not visible. Okay. The rest of her clothing was strewn around in the dark.
Yeah, so he would have seen it.
What Luke was referring to was the clothing she was wearing at school that afternoon. And during one of the interrogations, he said, that's the jeans she was wearing that night. And then he corrected himself and said, that afternoon. Now, the lead up to that bit, every question had been about that night. And then it switches to what she was wearing in school. And he carries on and says that night and then corrects himself and says that afternoon.
Yeah. So something that's very easily done. Like you can very easily misspeak when you've been talking about one thing for a long time and then it suddenly changes.
It's actually a tactic that the police use.
After watching the murder in a small town documentary and finding articles, news stories, and online speculation myself during the investigation and research on this case, it is undeniable that the media had a part to play in how Luke was treated by not only the public, but by the police. I wondered if Dr. Lean could clarify if the police purposely leaked Luke's name to the media at the time to strengthen their case when convicting him, or maybe justify why they were focusing on a teenage boy for the murder of Jodi. As someone who studied journalism, one of the main points that we're taught when it comes to news stories involving minors is that you're not allowed to name them in the press. Do you think this case helped change that due to the public opinion of Luke before he even made it to trial? And why do you think the media decided that it was appropriate to name someone so young and demonize them in the press?
Do I think this case changed that? Potentially. I do believe it was actually the Christopher Jeffries case that stopped them naming suspects prior to proceedings. So I think there were a great number of misgivings about the way Luke had been treated as a minor. Yeah. But I don't believe the law has not changed, incidentally. It's the guidelines that have changed, not the law. Yeah. And you'll know from studying journalism that there is this real reluctance to make laws about what journalism can and can't do, because we're supposed to have free speech, freedom of investigation. And I 100% agree with that, by the way. Yeah. So to start restricting that in law is to take away a fundamental freedom of democracy. Yeah. However, in Luke's case, why? I think in many ways it was hysteria. Yeah. Pure hysteria. Once the case started rolling, once one publication had done it, it was open season. Yeah. And then because one had done it, the next one could go a stage further, and the next one could get even worse, and so on and so on. And it just grew arms and legs. But I think it was hysteria. It didn't help. And we know for sure the police were feeding the media. We know this for absolute certainty. So there is a suggestion, at the very least, that the police were reassuring the journalists. No harm done. Yeah.
I was going to say, do you think that the police actually leaked his name to the media? Because I don't understand otherwise how a journalist can go and be like, oh, I understand they probably asked if there was any suspects, but as Luke was a minor at the time, I don't think it was morally right for the police to even suggest that he could have been a suspect at that time, seeing as he was only like 14, 15, wasn't he?
You raise a very interesting point and something that I'd never thought about before. When they first named Luke, it was not as a suspect.
Oh,
It
okay.
was Jodi was going to meet him as a boyfriend that
Yeah.
evening and didn't make it. So he wasn't named as a suspect. But the Criminal Cases Review Commission in 2014 determined that Luke was legally a suspect from the moment he was put in the police car after Jodi's body was found, put in the police car and taken to the police station. So although they had named him as Jodi's boyfriend, not as a suspect, legally he already was a suspect. It's a very good point. I've never ever thought about that before. Thank you.
I decided to ask if Dr. Sandra Lean had any personal feelings on the case for two reasons. The first was that as someone who has been involved in the case over the last 2 decades, I imagined she would have some insight on the way the investigation was handled and the media depiction of Luke. The second was to find out whether any theories that have been circulating online about who else could have done the horrific acts to Jodi had any merit to them. As someone who studied criminology, could you share your personal feelings on this case?
It's quite a difficult one because as a criminologist, from a professional perspective, feelings really can't come into it.
Yeah.
You've got to sit back and you've got to say, right, what does the evidence tell me?
Yeah.
What does the lack of evidence tell me? Put the two together and what are the conclusions that can be drawn from these? So in the early days, yes, I had many feelings about what had been done, what hadn't been done, how it should have been done. And then as the years went on and I had to learn to step back. So for example, you will probably have seen online, there are lots of people who have theories about who it must have been on the basis of the information we have. And the thing I keep saying is, we don't know what we don't know. On the evidence we have right now, yes, you could draw this particular conclusion, but what if there's other evidence that hasn't yet been uncovered that would change that completely? So my feelings on it are just that I don't know what I don't know. Yeah. So I have to look at what we have and always remember there could be something else here. There could be something that was never collected, which is, as a true crime investigator, you will be aware there is so much that is simply not collected. We never know about it until maybe by chance down the line a witness comes forward and says, oh, I've been out of the country for the last 10 years. I told the police this, and it changes everything. So those are my feelings, is we need to be really, really careful and always be aware that whatever we have in front of us and however much we have in front of us still probably is not everything there is to know. Yeah, that's a very good point. Before we get into this part of the interview, I wanted to ask Dr. Sandra Lean if she believes there's still a possibility of Luke Mitchell being acquitted for the murder of Jodi Jones. Dr. Lean, as the leading criminologist on the case, has spent years analysing the evidence and highlighting flaws in the investigation. With her extensive expertise and focus on potential wrongful convictions, I was particularly interested in her view on whether the case could be reopened. This is especially important considering that in late 2022, the police destroyed crucial evidence which may have significantly impacted Luke's chances of securing an acquittal. Do you believe that there is a way for Luke to get an acquittal? I know I don't need to know fresh evidence or anything that could maybe jeopardize the likelihood of that, but do you believe that sometime in the future that could be a possibility? Absolutely. I would not have kept going for 21 years had I not believed that. And when we discovered that the police had destroyed the evidence at the end of 2022, and that some of the evidence had been saved. We'd caught them before they destroyed everything. And what was saved were forensic samples. Yeah. Having spoken to a number of forensic scientists over the years, known the way that these things work, the biggest chance of overturning this conviction. And I think people also need to understand, this is not about getting Luke out.
No.
This is about finding out who did to Jodi what was done to her and bringing that person to account.
Yeah.
And when Luke's conviction is overturned because the evidence doesn't point to him, then it will have to point to somebody else. And these samples, properly tested, fully tested, are the biggest single possibility of that happening. Yeah. The difficulty we have here is, do they still have the samples, or have they too disappeared since November 2022?
Yeah, that's because I know that after a certain amount of time, police stations and police forces decide to not I don't want to say destroy, but they do decide to kind of get rid of evidence, especially if a conviction has already taken place, which I don't find right, in my opinion, because as you said, it could lead to someone else.
Yeah, well, there are time limits in the UK. So I believe the last time I looked, it was 12 years after the last proceedings in a case. So that's either the last appeal or the last action by the Criminal Cases Review Commission, and they can only destroy at the end of that period if there is no indication that further proceedings, so further appeals, further commission applications, might be forthcoming. So in Luke's case, for example, we had made it clear at every step of the way that we would be going back to the commission. It was absolutely clear there would be further proceedings. And after the documentary in 2021, if you look at the newspaper coverage, everybody was talking about, what now? Will we go back to the commission? Is this new evidence? So it couldn't have been any clearer that we were going back, and still they destroyed the evidence. The proceedings, the last proceedings, were 2014, when the Criminal Cases Review Commission turned down the application to have the case referred back to the Court of Appeal. So that was 2014. 12 years from then would have been 2026.
Yeah, so it was the timeline. It doesn't add up, does it? It wouldn't have been. No. Is there anything else that you would like to add at the end, seeing as I've only got like a couple of minutes left? Is there anything else that you would like to add or talk about in these last couple of minutes?
Keep sharing this story. The more people that hear it, the more chance there is of enough pressure building up to have the authorities look at this case and say something went wrong. Thank you so much for covering the story as well. Another audience.
Yes,
more people.
That is all for this video. Don't forget to subscribe so you're notified on my next true crime case. And like the video if you really did like the video. Also comment down below your thoughts on this case, along with any others you would like me to look into. It could be my next one.